we were talking about a vital attribute, which is what we call rule of law. And I did say for a start that the foundation of all true nations is law. And you agree with me on that. Law also produces a nation, and it is law that produces a nation, not actually government. I know you can say, oh no, it's government, but look at it from this perspective that law is actually superior to government because law produces government. How is that? Most of us, in fact, all of us, we live in nations where we we change government ever so often, and you will see that all that is done in transitioning from one government to another is based on law. And as a matter of fact, any aspiring administration that violates law more or less disqualifies itself from being able to rule. So no matter how big the government is, it is still subject to the law of the land. And any violation will attract strict, sometimes very stern response. So the government itself must obey the constitution of the land where it is constituted. Not only that, we know that the constitution is the aspiration of the people in a covenant or document that is protected by and produce law. That is just an attempt to say what the constitution of a land is. The constitution is the aspiration of the people in a covenant or in a document, and that document is protected by and actually becomes the basis of law. So, rule of law, therefore, is the ideal of every nation. Every nation that wants to be respected, that wants to attract investment, that wants to be in the committee of nations, must be a nation that is ruled by law. So, in that sense, it doesn't matter who the people are in that nation or in that government. We want to see a nation that is ruled by nation. As a matter of fact, we are not so much interested in the leader, even though the leader is important. We actually prefer that the law still presides over the affairs of the country, so that the leader cannot just do as he or she pleases. And that's why you have dictatorship when a person becomes a law unto himself. It's a state of tyranny where someone, rather than being subject to law, actually becomes law in himself or in herself. That's something that no one ever wants to see. But how does this compare to the concept of kingdoms when we talk about, not being a law to oneself? So let's look at how this is a subtle difference when we talk about kingdoms. Because in a kingdom, the king is actually the source of law. You know, and that is why kingdoms are different from democratic government or any other kind of government. In a kingdom, the kingdom is the source of law. And when the king speaks, his word becomes law. When I say king now, it's a generic term for the monarchy. So when the monarch speaks, her or his word becomes law. Why? Because the king himself is the personification of law. I will tell you something very briefly about the country where we are. And it's a constitutional monarchy where the head of state is actually Her Majesty the Queen. Now, whilst I was doing my research, I found one interesting title that the Queen bears. It's called the Fount of Justice. Fount means the source or the fountain, which means justice actually springs out of Her Majesty. Now, it does not say justice springs out of the throne. No, it actually springs out of Her Majesty as a person. So that's why in kingdoms, the king or the royal or the queen personifies law. Okay, now that is why when you look at this in the Holy Scriptures, when you hear Jesus speaks, it will say, "You have heard it said that an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth." In other words, your community has lived by this standard for so long, and this is what you all look to as your standard. But in that moment, Jesus will always switch the coin and say, "But I say to you." Now, what qualifies Jesus to interfere with law and say something else? Well, it's because of a reason that I'm going to address in the next slide. But just in a quick note, that he could say, "I say to you," because he has right to interfere with law, or to actually to propound and present law. Okay. Now, nations are built and sustained by law. We know that. Every of our nations that are ruled by law um, give us enough testimony to this. Now, the intent of God was not the creation of religions. That was far from it. As a matter of fact, from the in the early accounts in scriptures where you had that was attributed to Moses, you see that the first chapter, the second chapter, the third chapter had nothing of religion in them, because that was not the intent of God. As a matter of fact, as a quick note, when God was going to more or less initiate another country, and he called out to a man that was called Abraham, what he told him was, "Look, let's start again. Let's start and let's make a new nation." And all he gave to Abraham was a promise, which later on became what we now saw down the line as some set of laws. But it was never any religion. Now, Jesus, in that light, never introduced himself as a religious leader. As a matter of fact, he refused to identify with any religion, any body of religion. He saw the Pharisees and he ignored them. He saw the Sadducees and he ignored them. Why? That was not his priority, and that was not the original intent in man of God. What you would see is that Jesus affirmed, and he did say that he was, is, and shall be a king. That was all written across. And his trial before Pilate was to the effect that, "Are you a king then?" And he said, "Well, you have said so." And the nation of Israel said, if he calls himself a king, then he is not a friend of Caesar. So it's become a political issue now. So, and if you take sides with him, then you yourself, Pilate, have become an enemy to Caesar, and we will report you, and Caesar will have your head. So Jesus, even to the point of death, did affirm that he was a king. That was, of course, the basis for him to be able to say, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, love your neighbor." In other words, I tell you the intent of the law. I have the right I have the prerogative to set straight the law. So he affirmed that his government was not from as a matter of fact, he affirmed that his government was not from earth, but from the kingdom of heaven. That should be, was from the kingdom of heaven, but his government was functional in the world. Okay. Not only that, he also affirmed that he had a country and a nation. That's why when he would pray, he would say, "Well, when you pray, this is how you should pray. Your Father is not on earth, is in heaven." So, and he was saying, "Look, that is where that's the country where I came from." It would say things like this: "I came from above, you are from below. I'm not from here." Okay. So he also affirmed that the priority of his citizens is to keep laws. So if Jesus was a religious leader, then all he could possibly have would be ritual laws and not national laws. Because religion is not about governing a nation, as it were. It's actually about keeping laws that are, at best, call them ritual laws. Now, I'm going to say something about ritual laws um, in definition. So, what are ritual laws? Ritual laws are temporary, they are temporary or secondary laws, and they are customs and programs required to entrench a redemption. Because we see that all through the Old Testament in scriptures, right from um, Leviticus, Numbers, and all that, and you see all of wash your hands, wash your feet, wash all of that. All of those are customary laws that were meant to entrench a redemptive purpose. Something was wrong. Let's try our best to correct it. Let's try and manage and salvage the situation. As a matter of fact, that was one of the reasons why when it came to the time of Jesus, they actually accused him. They said, your disciples will not wash their hands before they eat. Now, they were focused on the rituals, on the customs. And Jesus was saying, look, in setting the record straight, there is something more important than washing your hands. As a matter of fact, wash your hearts. Okay. So now, in contrast to that, creation laws are principles which are original, which are natural, which are permanent and inherent standards built into all creation and are required for normal functioning. You know, in saying that our eyes function to see, it has its own law. The birds, they fly, they have their own laws. The fish can swim. When you put a seed in the soil, in the right soil, it just grows without monitoring. It just grows without any other effort. And these are inherent laws. They are natural laws. They are original laws. They are permanent laws. As long as you have time, you have day and night, that will always be the case. Okay, so creation laws are permanent and they are instituted by God. And this is one thing that is very important. Creation laws cannot be defied without consequences. Case in point, we all need to sleep. Now, if someone just goes on first day without sleep, by the end of second day, it will be struggling. By the third day, that person may not be able to function anymore. Why? That is a natural law. Those who sleep should sleep in the night. Just natural. And that's why research is showing now that it is actually detrimental to health to work shift hours. In other words, once you alter your uh, clock cycle, the body's clock cycle, it begins to promote stress, releases free radicals in the body, which are capable of producing or causing diseases. So, and that's only because certain natural laws are being violated for some reasons. Now, a ritual law, by contrast, is a temporary and is actually a shadow of the real laws, the natural laws. Okay, now this we mentioned last week, so I will gloss over it very quickly. Talking about divine laws, they are laws inherent in creation and instituted by God. We are talking about this as kingdom leaders, not just um, you know leaders out there. We are looking to find the root of our leadership stand in divine laws, in laws instituted by God, so that we can begin to help our societies to function better, not to impose religious laws on them, because that is not what we're about, but to actually look at how societies have moved away from divine laws and be an example to say, well, it could actually be this way and this could be better. Divine laws originate from God without man's counsel. In other words, there's something I see here. They call certain um, lawyers are called QCs. They'll be very senior lawyers. I think it's the equivalent of senior advocates of nations in other countries. But QCs, they are actually counsel to the queen or if you have a king, KC, counsel to the king, and their job is actually to, take counsel with the king in making sure that the right kind of law go forward is advanced in the nation. But this is different. Divine laws originate from God without input from any one man, because no one is actually qualified to be his counselor. Now, divine laws pre-exist and are superior to other laws. Divine laws have no side effect that we know of. They are actually absolutely for our good. Everything created has capacity to obey divine laws. Everything. That is why even the corn obeys divine laws. And it says, get me into the right soil. I will take over from there. Sleep says, well, after you've walked for a bit, I will take over your body and initiate a process of renewal. And that's why, I always say that stress is just not right for the body. I'm totally convinced by that. Stress is not, hard work is different from stress, but stress is actually something that we should look to avoid by every means. All right. So now mankind is perhaps the only being that can exercise free will either to submit or to violate divine laws. The corn wouldn't, animals wouldn't actually. Only mankind have that prerogative only because, or have that capacity because of the factor we call free will. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But what we know is that violation of divine laws is and always at the root of societal ills. Let's look at an example. Do not steal. Violation of that is the reason why our houses are now, they have so mighty walls that sometimes look like prisons. So we live in free societies, but it seems like the walls of our houses are growing bigger and bigger. I remember a time, when my grandmother told me that there was a time when they were growing up and they could put their what they want to sell on the side of the road and go away to do something else. Whoever wants to buy would simply just come there, put down the money, take the goods, and go away. And when they come back, whenever they come back, the money will always be there. But you can tell how far away we are from those sort of days. So, in looking at this again from a kingdom perspective, we know that the official residence of God is a territory called the kingdom of heaven. How do I know that? Our Father who art in heaven. So that is what we know to be the official residence. But now that residence is not some esoteric place that has no bearing with earth. As a matter of fact, Jesus did say that he came from there, and he was saying that the people that are with him actually belong there as well. They have their citizenship in that place. So the priority of God is the impact of his kingdom, that kingdom of heaven on earth, which is to make sure that heaven impacts earth. One of these days, I hope we'll be able to talk a lot more on what that statement means. Heaven, the kingdom of heaven imparting the kingdom of earth. Now, kingdoms, as we know them, they are territories, they are countries, they are nations, and they are governments. How? In this country where I live, I know you have the kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is the territory, that is the country, that's the nation or the group of nations. But we also know we have the kingdom of Our Majesty the Queen, which is the government over the territory. So that's why I say kingdoms are not just territories or nations, they are also governments. So that's what we allude to when we talk about kingdom law, kingdom constitution, and all that. So every nation, including kingdoms, has constitutional laws. They have constitutional laws. And the constitution, as we said earlier on, is the covenant between the government and its citizen. We're talking about this from kingdom perspective. The constitution is the covenant between the government and the citizens. It is the contract, it is the mode of governance, it is the agreement that establishes the relationship between the government and citizen. Now, the king in a kingdom is the source of law. I mentioned that earlier on. Every time something is repeated here is actually for sake of emphasis and to get us to think about it a bit more. Now, the most important document in a nation, as we know, is the constitution. Why? That is where all of our rights, aspirations, what we really hope to build as a nation is written. Now, not only that, the most important document, therefore, to a citizen has to be the constitution. Why? The nation relates to the citizen relates to the nation through the document called constitution, and vice versa. That's why that has to be the most important document between the nation and its citizen. Now, talking about kingdom law, in the first place, we know that the king is the government in a kingdom, just like we said that kingdoms are governments. But in the sense of a kingdom, we know that the king is a government. In democratic government, you can say that, well, the president's administration is the government of the day. But in a kingdom, and this is where the kingdoms differ from other forms of government, the king is the government in a kingdom. Now, what is the significance of that? It means that because laws proceed from the king, it means therefore that the king's law govern his country. The king's law govern his country. That's why, if you remember, there was an instance when the Israelites haven't left their former territory and were moving to now start a new country. The first thing that was said was, look, you are kind of numerous in number, and we need to have a way to govern ourselves. So the first thing they said is, this book of the law, not just book, the emphasis actually is the law. This book of the law is what you all have to pay attention to as a way of governing your country. Now, Matthew 16:19 says, and I will give unto you keys of the kingdom of heaven. And that's why pay attention to that highlighted statement, keys of the kingdom of heaven. Why? Kingdom of heaven, we said that is a country, that's a nation. Now, keys of the kingdom means that the country has certain keys by which it operates. And see what could happen. He said, and whatsoever you bind on earth will be bind in heaven. In other words, you can operate the keys of that territory right from where you are, right from another territory called earth. Let me explain that a bit. Sometimes, as citizens of countries, we travel to another country. And let's say an American citizen is in, say, the Bahamas, or it's in United Kingdom. Now, every country maintains an embassy in other countries as long as they have good relations. Now, from United Kingdom, the American citizen can operate special access to his own government through the embassies or through other agencies of that government. For example, you can access your country's website to know what the current information is that is meant for every citizen, like advisory information for every citizen. You can actually go to the consulate to seek certain consular help. And if you're in trouble for any reason, the government can come in and say, we have some of our citizens in a particular country, let us go and evacuate them. We saw that happen in some countries where there have been troubles recently. And in fact, a sad note was for someone that was taken hostage, and the government of those countries tried to either negotiate or get their citizen out through military means. So now that is keys of operating the keys of a kingdom, of another country. So in this sense, it says, look, I will give to you keys of the kingdom of heaven. So even though you've traveled to a foreign land, earth, you can still operate access, special access, the keys of the country, your own country. All right. Now, I've highlighted that in that place. So, what keys of the kingdom? What does that really mean? It simply means laws by which the kingdom operates. And there are numerous laws by which they operate. There is never one key to a kingdom. There are keys that open different privileges and rights. So, talking about keys, keys are principles and laws established by the creator of a product that are necessary for successful function. That's the first thing to note about that. The other thing is this: if you know the key to any door, you can operate it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Sometimes people go out of the house and maybe one partner takes the key away and the other partner couldn't really enter because either she forgot her key or he forgot his key or something like that. Now, even though you are a legitimate resident of that house, you cannot enter simply because you do not have the key. So when we say know there, I've underlined it, it means a lot of things. If knowledge of it, is understanding it, is knowing how to apply it. So effective application of keys depends on understanding the keys. And the question would be, what key opens which door and how? And that is all the basis of effective application. Effective application of keys depends on understanding. And therefore, success and failure are predictable because they are dependent on keys. You know, someone could stay outside of the door for many hours. Why? As long as the keys are not there to open the door, the person stays outside. Now, the food is in the house, water is in the house, clothes are in the house, the bedroom and the bed is in the house, and this person outside the house may be suffering hunger, thirst, sleep deprivation, only because there is no key to open the door. And in fact, having opened the door, if the key that opens the storage house to the food is missing, yes, you are in the house, but the key to open that storage food storage is not available. And so success and failure can be predicted and they depend on keys. The reason why we are going through all this is so that we can, as we appreciate law more and more, we can actually be advocates, citizens that are responsible to help other people to uphold the law of the land, any land where we are, and become part of the solutions rather than contributing to the issues that are at our hand, the problems at our hand. Now, there's no way we talk about law and we will not really talk about citizenship. So let's look at citizenship from a kingdom context. I took out this dictionary meaning when I was looking at citizenship, and it says a citizen is a member of a free society or free city or jural society possessing all the rights and privileges which can be enjoyed by any person, its constitution and government, and subject to the corresponding duties. Simply put, a citizen is a member, belongs to a particular community, city, or society, and it has the privilege, or it has privileges and rights that are guaranteed by the constitution and the government of that land. But not only that, the citizen also has duty to stay in line in the good books of the constitution or the government. So we can say it this way, that a citizen is a legal or constitutional entity of any country. Okay? A constitutional citizen, therefore, pledges allegiance to the national constitution. So, for people who've taken citizenship of one country or the other, when you take that, for example, in America, what you do is actually to pledge allegiance to the constitution of the United States of America. That's why you say, we the people, so, so, and so. But in the context of a kingdom, that's very different. Why? Because kings actually appoint citizens in a kingdom, and they expect the citizens to obey the law that comes from the king. So, in a kingdom citizen pledges allegiance to the throne or to the king. Now, for people who know a bit about United Kingdom, when you take citizenship of United Kingdom, what you do is you pledge allegiance to the Queen of England, or the Queen of United Kingdom, to be a loyal subject. And that is the difference between a constitutional citizen and a kingdom citizen. Now, what does this mean in terms of the kingdom of God that we speak about? As citizens of the kingdom of God, what we do is we pledge allegiance to the king. How do we do that? To obey his laws. Okay. Now, the power of the citizen is our ability to exercise the rights and privileges guaranteed by the Constitution. In fact, a citizen only needs to make sure he is in right alignment, on the right side of the Constitution. And as long as that is the case, everything will be fine. Now, some of us have traveled to a few countries. Now, the one thing you will notice that no matter where you relocate to, you still maintain the citizenship of your country, the country you belong to. So, physical relocation does not alter citizenship right. What does that mean? If you have citizenship of the kingdom of heaven, even if you are on earth, you still have the rights of being a citizen of that country. And that's why it says, and I give to you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, what you bind in on earth will be effected in heaven, which means you do not need to travel to heaven to effect rights in heaven. You can, just like what I explained the other time, a citizen in the country where he resides, because of business, because of immigration or whatever thing, can still exercise its citizenship right from the country where he or she resides. Look at this. John 15:16. It says, you did not choose me, but I chose you. And I said the other time that in a kingdom, the king actually chooses who will become citizen. Why? In the kingdom, once you become a citizen, the king is obligated to take care of you. Okay. And it says, I chose you to bear fruit, a fruit that will last. And of course, you can then be in good relationship with me. Look at this again. John 14:15 says, if you love me, keep my command. So I said the other time that the primary duty of the citizen is simply to keep the law that comes from the king. Now, of course, you can say this in this way, that a citizen maintains relationship with the government by obedience of law. Okay, I'll talk quickly about citizenship power, and I'll put it this way. All the power that a citizen can exercise is utterly dependent on his or her knowledge of the law or the constitution. And that's why sometimes, and I must say that it's most of the time, it's one of the most boring books to read. Why? is written in legal languages that an average citizen does not really want to care about. And why are lawyers more important than average citizens? Well, just one simple word. They have knowledge of the constitution and the citizen does not. That's why when there's a legal matter, you have to go and hire somebody who will spend time to learn it, to represent one in the law court. Why? The law court is not interested in emotions, but only what is constituted by law. So, which means without knowledge of the keys, as you said it, or the laws, a citizen's right may be violated. In fact, I should say will be violated. Why? If you don't know the keys, you don't know the laws that are yours by right of privilege, then it becomes harder to enforce it or to seek redress if they are violated. So a citizen is not a religious entity, but a legal entity. I hope that, should be quite clear by all of this. So whether you talk about a national citizen in a physical country, or you talk about a citizen of the invisible country of heaven, or call it spiritual country of heaven, we are talking about a legal individual, a legal entity. Okay. Now, citizens of a country cannot, therefore, obey their private laws. You cannot be in a country and choose your own laws and say, well, these are the things I want to do, and I will ignore the rest. So, in the same way, if we claim, we pledge allegiance to the kingdom of heaven, that's the kingdom of God, we cannot obey our private right. So, when the king says, you should not lie, now that is not up for discussion. Why? The king does not take counsel before he promulgates his laws, before he puts forth his laws. So a citizen is obligated to obey the king's law, not his private laws, or call it the national laws. Now, the success of the citizen is limited, as I said earlier on, by the knowledge of law. Now, the success of a citizen is limited to submission to and the obedience of law. That sounds like repetition, but it's saying in the first instance, submission. Now, you will see why I've used the word submission, and it's because of something. That something always stands between the citizen and the constitution or the law. And that thing is the will. Talking about will, I know many of us have been tempted to run through the red light when we have a very urgent appointment. Now the only thing that stops us from doing that is our will. We said, okay, no, I'll keep it. Why? The law may see me. Who is the law? A policeman. A policeman is an officer of the law, and he may just spot me as I go through. And so we become self-advised, and we choose to exercise our will to obey the law that says, when you see a red light, you stop. Okay, now the will of man is a divine endowment. It's a beautiful thing. But it's also something that makes us bear responsibility, because once you exercise your will, you are saying, I take responsibility for my action. Now, the will, therefore, must be trained and disciplined to achieve its potential success. And this is one thing that, and this is all of us really now, no matter where we are in life, at what level, this is something that we all need to pay attention to. We must continually train our will and put it through certain discipline in order that we can achieve the success that we really want. One example is this: if somebody is in business has its own law, and unless we train and subject ourselves to the laws of successful businesses, we will still have limitations in those businesses. Another one, relationships. Relationships of every kind have certain laws that govern them, and unless we do what is required, we will have relationships that are not quite where we want them to be. Now, the thing is this: some people sometimes say that, well, some people made them to do one thing or the other. Yes, there's always the threat of external influences or the factor of that. But the thing is this: external law is limited in instigating violation of law. Why? No one can actually uh, make us do what we don't want to do without permission, without our will permitting it. Okay, I talked about that in the ordinary sense. Of course, there are circumstances where something is imposed, maybe some kind of somebody being an overbearing person imposes his will, and we've seen that sometimes in autocratic governments where citizens are forced to do certain things. But we also know that in that kind of situation, whatever they're asked to do is always mostly against their will. But in the ordinary sense, external influence is actually limited in instigating violation of law. Now, obedience and disobedience are therefore creation of the will. Our will, our wills obey and they also disobey. So it follows that order and disorder are created by the will. So whether we have order or disorder, they are simply down to the fact that we have obeyed or disobeyed the laws. So, but the point is clear that disobedience, however it comes, creates disorder. So, in that sense, if you're looking at taking our ability to succeed to the next level, we can see that the key to success is submission and obedience to law. It's easy to say, I must admit, and that's why I said the other time that it takes training and putting ourselves under certain kind of discipline to actually have success, outstanding success. But suffice to say that submission to law is dependent on personal authority. I spoke about authority last week, which means that everybody has his personal authority, which is actually something that is entrenched on the will of the person. So, which means that will has to be exercised in order for us to submit to law. And when we talk about someone submitting, it shows that you have the power to, someone submits. When someone submits to something, the person that has exercised his power to subject his will. So if power does not exist to resist, then submission is unnecessary. In other words, submission indicates that power exists actually to do otherwise, but the person is exercising that power to subject or submit his will to go in one direction or the other. Submission actually to law indicates capacity to break the law. The same thing that makes us to submit to law is also the same thing that could make us break the law. The same thing. So submission is simply an act of will. And mankind, like we said, we are distinct in that element that we have the ability to exercise our free will, either for or against submission. But it comes to this that our will should be trained by discipline for success. I remember just this very quick one. When I was in my late primary school and early secondary school, I would sometimes sit up till late to read, just because I knew that the competition in my class was very tough, and I did not want to come back home with a kind of result that is not really commendable. So sometimes I'll have to make myself stay up tonight, and sometimes my dad would just come to the sitting room, see me reading, and we say nothing and just go to his room. But that required subjecting the will, Even though I was only a very young man at the time, but it required the a kind of discipline to um, achieve a certain kind of success, and that is applicable in everything, including business, family life, and other areas. Right. I will quickly talk about this: the relationship between law, society, and culture. Now, the purpose of the reason why we have written law is to remind citizens of legal provisions and responsibilities. If they are not written, chances are that we forget them and we may not know what we really have as provided for us by the Constitution. So, written law is intended to establish norms and order in society. When we have written law that says, when you see red light, you stop, when you see green, you go. That is meant to establish what a sense of normal and order in our society. So you could see that connection slowly between law and society. Now, the most notable and visible expression of society is culture. We say we have a society when there is some kind of culture that binds us together. That is why countries always say that their culture is something that they really, really pay attention to. So when, for example, in the case of immigration, when immigrants come in, the biggest fear in the minds of the local citizens is the fact that their culture is under threat. Why? Culture is inside people. So when people travel from one place to another, they go with the culture of the society that produced them. So, and if you want to know somebody's a particular society, just look at their culture. By the time you look at their culture, you can know what their society is like. Okay, and that could show in dressing, in language, in the music, in the food, and so many other things. Now, culture is established when written law becomes integrated with the law of the conscience. I wish we had time to discuss this more, but you know, when in most cases when you have a culture, you are not taking a book around to say, "Let me read and see what to do." No, it's become a part of the library of the mind. Last week I said something about conscience. So that's the embodiment of the law of the mind, of the library of the mind. And culture naturally oozes from what is established in the conscience of the society. Okay, now God's intent is to write his laws on men's heart and not on stones or paper. He never ever really wanted that. That was only intended to remind and to give a sometimes of reference so that once you forget, go back to it. As a matter of fact, the more people you have, the more the necessity for writing laws in some on some media, whether in the old times stones or in current day paper or electronic form. So now, say, and now you can observe that the more adjustment that we have to written laws, the more the society is in eh, 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 uh, suffers the threat of disintegration or fragmentation. I'll read it again. The more adjustment you have to written law, the more disintegrated and fragmented the law is. Why? If you have to cater for every different interest in the society, what you begin to have is more and more laws, and it just shows that there are less and less common interests. So, which means the society is fragmenting more and more, and by inference, also disintegrating. Law and social life. The quality of life in a nation is absolutely procured by law. Why? National life itself is protected by law. Not only that, the quality of life that you have in a nation or in a community begins to change as the attitudes of the people in that land uh, begins to change in response to law. So, which means if a group of people begin to, for example, let's say um, we will not walk on our lawns. Now, if the attitudes of the people begin to say, no, we actually want to play football on the lawns, what begins to happen is that the quality of life, the beauty of having a good garden where everybody can play and enjoy good scenery begins to change. If you say, well, we don't want to take other people's things, if the attitude of people becomes, okay, well, I actually want somebody else's thing, then the quality of life in that nation begins to change. So we say you have a country where you have security issues. You have security issues only because the attitude of people to law, whether written or unwritten, has changed. So all societies must adhere to law because everything in society is sustained by law. Now, the social community cannot function without written or unwritten law. You know, if I put my material out there, whether I write a law or not, I just want it to be kept where it is. Now that's an unwritten law, and as long as the society somehow agrees that it's okay to keep other people's things where they are, then we have an unwritten agreement that allows our society to function. That's why we say that social community cannot function without written or unwritten law. And of course, for terms of reference, we actually have them in writing so that we can cancel our excuses. The more knowledge of law we have, the less excuses we have, because knowledge of law actually cancels excuses. And they say excuse is not tenable in the court of law, or ignorance is not an excuse that's tenable in the court of law. We ought to know. Okay, now community is produced and maintained by law. The word community standing for, let's interpolate it, common unity. We can only have common unity if there's a law that helps us to function together. In rounding up, we've spoken about law, and we have some certain people might be thinking, why are we talking about law? From kingdom perspective, shouldn't we just talk about mercy and grace? Well, it's law still necessary if we have grace? I will round up this way. If someone was maybe had a traffic offense, it was running on 40 miles per hour where you have 30 miles per hour, and suddenly the police turned on the blue light and pulled the person over, and the person is taken to court. Now, if the magistrate says, well, I see that you have you have violated our traffic laws, how do you plead? If the person likes himself, because these days the police carry video evidences, so the person will say, well, I'm guilty. Now, when you have in such instances where you have an offender who is cooperative with the court, sometimes the lawyer might say, or the magistrate or the judge might say, well, I like your attitude, and I think I will pardon you. Now, the thing that is happening at that point is that the judge is extending mercy to that offender. Now, the judge might say, well, I can see also that you are a first-time offender, so I'm going to pardon you, but I want you to leave my court and never return here. At that point, the judge is extending grace to that offender. So when the judge says, go and don't return to my court, the judge is simply saying, go and keep the law that you violated ab initio, so that you don't have to come back to my court. So grace, therefore, I'm going to talk about it now in rounding up, that law cannot be eliminated from a nation. Why? Because the society will simply not function without it. Now, mercy defers the consequences of violation of law. Now, the punishment is still there. It could be triggered at any point in time. That's why sometimes we hear things like suspended sentence. But mercy says we will defer the punishment that is due to you at this time. Now, grace is permission to return back to the society to go and obey the law that was violated in the first instance. Because having been given grace, the offender is expected to now go and abide by traffic laws. So grace therefore does not cancel law. So grace is not cancellation of law. Grace actually is not freedom from obeying divine laws, but is permission to keep the laws in order to preserve social culture and maintain order and peace. I think we should. That's where I want to round up, and yeah, we've kind of hurried it a bit. So you may want to take a look at the replay. But thank you for uh, following us in this particular presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed it. So we will stop here, and the repeat broadcast will be available for um, our use. So I will just want to, you know, us to have that balanced approach in looking at law. That great law is what we all need to have functioning societies, but grace is a permission to return to obey law. Grace does not in any way cancel law. It actually reinforces law and helps somebody who's been pardoned to pay even more attention to keeping law. So because the law of God is inherent in all of creation, and creation can simply not function without law. So I hope this has been useful, uh, and I'm hoping that next week, God willing, we will be able to perhaps just, if there are questions, we'll probably start with those. And if there are contributions as well, we can always take input um, from our delegates, from all of our leaders, and we can share our insights. And I want to thank you at this point for being with us, and we um, want to wish you a very lovely day where you are, and we hope to see you soon. God bless you, and bye for now.